him, so I'm going to cut out everything I was going to say about him. One of Worcester's most popular artists right now, just a great guy who's the only guy in the room wearing a tie. Brian Burris. Brian, thank you.
I have cue cards, so I'm going to need the hands-free version. Let's see if I can get this positioned properly before we get started. Well, as you can see, my name is Brian Burris, and through painting, I approach the soul. Whether that implies God, or some transcendent self, or the psyche of psychology, I'll leave that to you. My approach is through my technique. I describe it as aleatory, which means progressing by chance, and I employ the techniques of automatic painting as well, which translate repetitive movements. Now, aleatoricism, which is a difficult word to pronounce, is subconscious and random, shepherded by the confines of the composition. In my case, predominantly, these are bifurcated color fields, like you see there. Now these color fields, they could be said to represent the conscious and unconscious, conscious, subconscious, heaven and earth, yin and yang, any permutation of the eternal theme of opposites and infinite regress. And through the chance, through the aleatory technique, the details arise that give it the emotive impact of the paintings. So I can't say that I intended that to look the way it did. It's these chance elements that communicate the emotive content of the painting. These nuances which enter the painting unbidden, they evoke an identification with the archetypal, which is to say the viewer interprets them and perceives the same emotional content with which they were created. It's a non-verbal communication from unconscious to unconscious. And the language of this primordial communication is color and hue, and declination of line, juxtaposition of forms, actual centers and sites in your brain that respond specifically to colors and hue and declination of line. It's really an intimate form of communication. Then there's surreal automatism, which is intended. And then there's the mediumistic automatism, which is more channeling some other force through your actions. So it could be said that I paint ghosts, or souls, or the 10,000 things, and none of these statements would be any less accurate than any of the others. You could call it automatism, the half-remembered fantasies of the psyche, or the reflections of Jung's greater unconscious. Either way, I paint from that place. I don't differentiate between these. The suspension of disbelief is necessary when painting from the unconscious. So you could assert that the meaning arising from chance comes from a hidden source, or Gnostic source, a metaphysical source. It's really no different than assuming it comes from the unconscious, and the psychological, and the theological. The aleatory methods have been used for thousands of years to plumb the self and other mysteries. So I cast the bones and paint. And the patterns evolve of their own accord. So through painting, I seek to touch the unknown, fathom hidden truths, glimpse the sublime. And I'd like to think the paintings reflect that. Especially when people tell me, I think your paintings are disturbing. At that point, I feel they've done it. So, to try to invoke that atmosphere, I paint in tones that evoke the basic human emotions of doom, tragedy, and ecstasy, as I quoted Rothko before. These emotions echo the prime human trauma, the separation of being abandoned. This disillusionment lies at everybody's core. Either you've been abandoned by your parents through divorce, or the inability for them to love you, or inevitably by your parents dying. This is a primal abandonment. Or after prolonged suffering, abandoning hope, or feeling you've been abandoned by God. This is the universal wound that all systems attempt to heal, and by the promise of reconciliation with that which has been lost. It's the basis of religion and philosophy and psychology, is to alleviate the personality of this loss. Or at least that's what I'm told. So that's what I paint. Empty landscapes that echo the pang of separation, the gulf between individuals that you just can't breach by spoken word, intimacy. You know, language is such a crude tool that people often, they just can't be speaking about the same thing, although they can approach it. So I try to speak to that, the desire to recoup that original loss. I seem to have outpaced my paintings. So as you can see, these are my bifurcated colors.
What's your medium?
Acrylic.
Okay. How big are most of these, Brian?
36 by 48 is general size. Some are as big as 54 by 54.
Do you make prints?
No, I don't.
You should.
Anyway, this is my final slide. Thank you for your time.